Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading from Distant Memories and Nurse Morgan series, Book 2, by Kate MacInnis, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Morgan Cutler celebrated her day off with a long, luxurious shower, minus a dead, cold, clammy hand grabbing her rear or breasts. She was giddy as she dried herself off without help. No contact with the spirit world this morning felt like a lucky omen, and she would take any positive signs she could get. Her co-worker, Caleb Lightfoot, M.D., in her bed overnight didn't hurt her mood either. Several months ago, Morgan had a ruptured brain aneurysm followed by surgical repair. When she awoke, everything seemed fine, but as the weeks passed, she developed supernatural abilities that allowed her to see, hear, smell, and talk to dead people. This was not a divine skill that she had ever wished for nor wanted. Not a big believer in the paranormal, she was more terrified that she had lost her mind or developed another disease in her brain. Her neurosurgeon was dismissive and wouldn't discuss the possibility simply because none of his other patients had complaints like hers. With the help of Savannah Holt, M.D., her boss, she established the good news that she had come out of the experience with a gift, the ability to communicate with folks on the other side. The bad news was that they were in her house, car, workplace, and anywhere else they wanted to appear. One of them loved to visit her in the shower or tub. No preference, but a significant persistence. Having discovered and identified her often invisible roommates, Elisabeth and Jonathan Wilkerson, Morgan knew she would have to come to terms with no longer living alone and adjust to the nocturnal habits of otherworldly roommates. But living with ghosts was not nearly as easy as it sounded. For one thing, they had no regard for personal space or time of day. Oddly, they also had boundless energy. These issues frequently kept her up at night, and she often had to report to work at the hospital more tired than when she'd left the day before. As the charge nurse in the Good Samaritan Hospital Emergency Center in Metro Detroit, Morgan was often exhausted, hungry, and tense when she got home from a 10-hour shift. The last thing she needed or wanted was to witness their ghost parties in the middle of the night or their excessively romantic public displays of affection in the kitchen and backyard for all the world to see. Although, as of yet, no one on the block had complained about seeing the Wilkersons, she could only hope that they were invisible to the folks in the nearby houses. She concluded that the best way to manage the situation was to accept their existence and establish rules about alone time and personal boundaries. To her surprise, the Wilkersons also had concerns. After a lengthy yet civilized conversation, a compromise was reached in order to keep a happy home for all occupants. It was resolved that Morgan would have no interruptions from the Wilkersons while entertaining unless she specifically summoned them to appear. She would also have absolute privacy in the bathroom and bedroom. In turn, the Wilkersons requested that Morgan stay away from their parties, and she was not to interrupt them when they were dancing inside or outside of the house. So far, so good, and the formal agreement was working. This particular morning, Morgan was content. This emotion was rare, and she smiled as she dressed in her favorite jeans and long-sleeve t-shirt. As with most in her field, her job as a charge nurse involved a lot of responsibility and stress, and she tended to be preoccupied about patients and outcomes long after her shift was over. She was well known throughout the hospital as a no-nonsense, hard-working nurse who had seen it all, of which made contentment a new experience for her. She blew dry her dark cropped hair and styled it with her fingers as she thought about the basis of her relaxed outlook. Maybe it was because Caleb, clearly the hottest doctor at work, had spent the night again. Third time. Her heart raced a little as she thought about him. The man was intelligent, had a great sense of humor, and listened to her. He treated her as if her opinion and experience mattered. Without a doubt, he was too good to be true, and she was sharp enough to know that every silver lining had a dark cloud someplace. Her heart and spirit had been broken and battered so many times, she needed a GPS tracker to locate all the pieces. But for now, she was taking this, whatever it was, slowly, and planned to enjoy every inch of him for as long as it lasted. Besides, he was gifted with the good sixth sense. He was not always able to actually see the Wilkersons, but often saw enough to be helpful. He accepted her abilities unconditionally, and she greatly appreciated him for being open-minded. He was also under tremendous stress and often distant as he thought about patients, outcomes, severity of diseases, and damages to the human body as they came into the emergency center. It was part of the territory, and Morgan didn't mind it a bit when he was quiet and reserved. He worked out situations internally and always returned from the journey with a smile. Her way of dealing with pressure was far more direct, but the point was that they came to the same conclusions. They just took different routes to get there. She rubbed her face and thought about her job at Good Sam. Nursing certainly had its share of physical and emotional challenges, but nothing like she'd encountered for the last month or so at home. After the aneurysm, she'd learned to roll with seeing ghosts and tried not to panic every single time it happened, since nothing to this point had threatened her with bodily harm. Still, this was a very new and different than her previous predictable and mundane life alone. It wasn't all bad living with the Wilkersons. She didn't have any family anyway, and the ghost entertained her most of the time. Truth was, she had great chats with Elisabeth and really enjoyed the time spent with her. Morgan was not comfortable with letting all of her coworkers know the truth at this point in time. The only one she trusted with complete details was Savannah, who, despite being her boss, had been her best friend for the past 20+ years. Savvy, as she was known to her friends, was a tough, brilliant, often rigid Southern belle who relied first on science and second on cold logic. For the past 2 decades, Savvy had been the physician chief of the entire emergency center and hired Morgan when she was fresh out of nursing school. Savvy ran the EC without flinching and was unfazed by Morgan's new talents with the afterlife. Turned out, Savvy had a fairly well-developed sixth sense that she had never bothered to mention before. It also became known that Savvy's mother was a psychic with close to 90% accuracy in her predictions and assessments. Who knew? Emergency desk clerk Tiffany, aka the Goth, also knew some of the details, but not the whole picture. Tiffany ran the desk in the EC with the efficiency of a ship's captain and did not waste time on fools or monsters. But she did overhear conversations Morgan had with the ghost residing in the hospital. Tiffany didn't judge. She continued on with her job and offered advice only when asked. And of course, Caleb was aware. Although fairly new to the EC family, he had a great deal of medical experience and had witnessed a lot of the activity around her house. Caleb was a skillful emergency room physician, which seemed to make him impervious to panic. Both Caleb and Savvy were cool customers. It was likely that Caleb would replace Savvy when she retired in the next few years. The thought of that always made Morgan race to the edge of a panic attack. She had never worked as a nurse without Savvy in charge. Morgan turned back to the bedroom doorway to take in the full view of her out-of-character, ultra-feminine, girly pink bedroom. No sign of Caleb. His clothes were there, neatly folded on the chair, while hers were scattered around the room, the result of carefree abandon as they'd undressed and fallen into her frilly bed the night before. On several occasions, Savannah had pointed out that the room looked like Laura Ashley exploded in it and was too much pink to see without a handy dose of insulin first. Maybe Caleb was appalled by the decor in the daylight and had hurried home without his clothes. Or he could have watched her sleeping and the snores and snorts scared him. When she was out cold, far braver men than he had been frightened by her noises. She left the room and glanced all around the little Cape Cod she called home in search of Douglas, her white bulldog. Hopefully, she'd also find scantily clad Caleb, the man of the hour, or day, or so. Maybe a month or two. Yes, she could see herself involved with him for a month or two, which fit her usual pattern with men. She felt a pang of anxiety as she thought about Caleb not being around. Douglas barked, and she knew right away from the tone that he had not been given a cookie after taking care of business outside. The bark sounded like it came from the back of the house where the kitchen was located. Morgan hurried down the stairs and stopped at the entrance of the bright cherry yellow room. Caleb was seated at the breakfast table with the newspaper spread in front of him. He had a mug of black coffee in his right hand as he bent over to have a direct face-to-face conversation with Douglas. That was never a good idea when Douglas believed gross negligence had occurred and he had been mistreated. Douglas liked to sneeze when confronted by a negative situation. The result was a sloppy, drippy bulldog explosion filled with debris. It would never mix well with the coffee or Caleb's beautiful face. By the look on Douglas's face, he was definitely irritated with Caleb. I gave you a treat already, and it's hard to believe that you should get two when you come in. I think you're taking advantage of me. Caleb spoke to Douglas with male authority. Douglas did not blink and glared at the uninformed human with the confidence born of security in his position as the most important male in the house in Morgan's life. A female apparition appeared suddenly and draped herself over Caleb's back. He was freshly showered and dressed only in last night's t-shirt and boxers. He continued his talk with the dog, seemingly oblivious to the gorgeous creature who nibbled his neck and ear. The woman had her fingers entwined in his long, shiny black hair that was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked up from stroking and licking Caleb's face when Morgan entered the room. The woman's red silk negligee had a neckline that barely contained her ample breasts. Her raven hair was swept up high in curls that flowed and fell all around her face. Morgan thought the intruder was the sexiest female she had ever seen in her entire life. Caleb stood and shuddered from head to toe. He rested his pale blue eyes on Morgan and grinned, which elicited a direct response from her nether regions. Before he could speak, a thunderous noise came from the dining room. Esmeralda, leave that man alone, resident ghost Elisabeth Wilkerson shouted as she stormed into the kitchen. How dare you? Elisabeth moved behind Caleb and pulled at the woman until the grip on him was broken. The stranger hissed and sprouted two snake heads from her chest. The reptilian tongues protruded and darted at Elisabeth from every possible direction. Elisabeth held her hands up and whispered a few words in Latin. The monster once again became the dark-haired beauty before she vanished into a cloud of smoke. Morgan whispered, "Whoa, who or what was that?" Caleb replied, "What?" Then he shook himself again from top to bottom and slapped at his legs. "What the heck is in here? I feel like I have a cobweb all over me." He turned around and added, "Hey, hi, Elisabeth. When did you get here?" "A minute or two ago. I pulled man-hungry Esmeralda Camarillo Castillo off of you, Caleb, and you can thank me later. She feels like it's her birthright to seduce every handsome man she sees, and I've battled with her several times over Jonathan. I don't know where she's been for a while, but she couldn't resist you, Doctor." Elisabeth appeared as a hologram at first and became more visible as she spoke. She shook her hands and wiped them on her wool skirt. "Thank goodness you were here," Morgan said. "I had no idea what to do." "Well, if she returns, pour water on her if you can. She really hates that." Elisabeth giggled and added, "I apologize for rushing off, but I have a date to play canasta with the girls this afternoon. It's been a lot of decades, and hopefully I'll remember how to do it." She waved and disappeared. Caleb whispered, If I understood Elisabeth correctly, I was being seduced by a beautiful ghost from long ago?" "Actually, Esmeralda was on you like a second skin as she chewed on some of your exposed parts," Morgan answered. Caleb looked down and patted his own nether regions to make sure all was well. He sighed and gazed directly at Morgan once again. "That could have been disastrous," he said. "How come you can't always see the ghosts?" Morgan asks. "I think it depends on their energy level. I can't see faint images or holograms very well, but I can see and hear them when they're whole, or whatever that's called when fully composed." He started to say something else when a car, sounding very close, revved its engine. Morgan frowned and walked across the kitchen and into the dining room where she could see the driveway that divided her lot from the yard of Mrs. Toland, the lady next door. The Jeep Wrangler slowly backed up, stopped, raced the engine, and then pulled forward into its original spot. She watched for a minute and turned to Caleb, who had followed her into the dining room. "Do you see the driver?" Caleb peered out the window. "Nope, I don't see anyone driving. Is that some special factory-added package on the car, or are your ghosts going for a joyride?" "The driver is a ghost, and he doesn't want to be seen. My money is on Jonathan Wilkerson learning how to drive the Jeep. I have to stop this now before he gets brave and goes out onto the open road. Jonathan loves toys and often forgets that he's not alive anymore." Morgan hurried out the back door and stood in the driveway with her arms crossed. She waited for the car to inch forward. Jonathan appeared behind the steering wheel and waved at her with a child's utter joy. He was dressed in a leather bomber jacket, leather helmet, silk scarf, and goggles. She estimated his top speed at just above idle. When he was close enough, Morgan stepped to the side and tapped on the driver's window. She motioned for Jonathan to roll the window down, but he couldn't figure out how. She pointed to the button on the dash and told him to push it. The window immediately opened as Jonathan grinned from ear to ear. "What do you think you're doing? How can I explain this if the neighbors see you?" "Oh, I've already thought that through, dear girl. We'll say that your car is being recalled by the factory because the engine starts and puts itself in gear. I saw that on a television show, by the way. We can say your particular vehicle happens to be stuck alternately in reverse and drive. Besides, I've been out here since daybreak, and no one but your kind self has approached the vehicle." Jonathan retired his scarf and poked around the seat until he found his leather gloves and put them on. "Get out of my car and go into the house. I am genuinely concerned that someone could see you and call the police." "No, dear girl, have more trust. Your neighbor lady left early this morning with a friend to spend the day and then dine at a casino in Detroit. But fear not, you are safe here with me. I shall not cause discord." Jonathan stepped from the car and bowed at the waist. Morgan stared at Jonathan as he took a step closer. She held out her hand and he dropped the fob into her palm. Jonathan sighed as his chin sagged to his chest. Caleb came out and put his hand on Morgan's shoulder. Jonathan looked up and smiled. "Kind gentlemen, good to see you in the daylight. Oh my, but you are a handsome fellow. Elisabeth said you were. Our dear girl here doesn't have many colors who stay until the morn, and certainly none as attractive as yourself." Jonathan again bowed at the waist. Caleb coughed, and Morgan took a step toward the ghost. "I'm going to buy some sage and place it in every room of the house, and then I'm going to light it." Thank you.